we've reached an interesting point where the mainstream has finally started discovering beverages, right? There's been a long time, a lot of building and struggling through the regulated cannabis space where beverages weren't quite making sense. But now that they're hitting the shelves of mainstream retailers like Total Wine and DoorDash, the mainstream consumer is starting to see it. And now that they're exposed to it, they discover that they like them. So the cat's a little bit out of the bag. Now, that's not going to stop policy from being implemented. But it won't stop the customers from wanting these products. And so either way, from a long-term perspective, we do see this as the opportunity for THC beverages to have their breakout moment. Like if anyone spent any time in Minnesota, going to a restaurant or a bar, being able to order a THC beverage and enjoy it like right alongside its alcohol counterparts, this is a whole new world, and people are loving it.
When I went to Minnesota, what staggered me is the size of the space. The beer cooler is almost the same size as the THC drink cooler, which is astounding for people that haven't seen anything like it. Why is Minnesota ground zero for THC drinks?
Well, in 2022, was it 2022? Yeah. They legalized low doses of THC from hemp in the mainstream marketplace. And so 5 milligram THC beverages, 10 milligram THC beverages started hitting the shelves. And the way it's proliferated is all driven by customer demand. And so what we see in retailers like Top 10 Liquors, Total Wine, is THC beverages in about 18 months achieving 10 to 15% of the market share in those retailers, which is astounding. Like, it's taken new product categories decades sometimes to reach that level of sell through. And now you have THC products reaching the top 10 of SKUs being sold at any given month. And so it's a really exciting time. I was up in Minnesota just about 3 weeks ago, and in a restaurant asking the owner, it's like, how often are you selling a THC beverage? And they said about 1 in every 5 beverages. And so I don't know, I'm not a mathematician, but that's 20%, right? And so just really exciting to see that. And Minnesota is just a microcosm of the rest of the US. There's not something fundamentally different about Minnesota. Unless you ask a Minnesota, I'm sure they would have a different answer. But, we'd like to think that translates to states like California, where you have about 8 times the population. And so when you're talking about $180 million of revenue in a given year, taking that to a larger market size, it's going to be a big hit.
Well, as someone who was a business development in that industry and sold THC drinks into 5-star restaurants that charge $80 for a steak, I sold it into a salon, a ski resort, and a concert venue where Live Nation is in control. So it is everywhere. It is all demos. And that will soon happen if, in fact, regulations don't continue in the direction that they're headed. I want to go back a little bit, just for the layperson. How does weed become a drink in 30 seconds to a minute? I mean, is that possible?
Absolutely. And it takes about that long. No, a little bit longer. But if you grow the plant, you can extract the active compounds from the plant. That usually comes off in a very viscous hydrophobic oil. So oil doesn't typically mix with water, makes it difficult to make drinks. But we employ a process called nano-emulsion. If you've used a salad dressing or an ice cream, those are emulsion based. A nano-emulsion just makes sure that those droplets are very small and stable. And so once you do the nano-emulsion, you can disperse it into a beverage, and it maintains its dispersion so that you get a nice, consistent experience throughout the entire beverage every time.
Do you taste the marijuana in the drink?
You can if you want to, but I would say 99% of our customers choose to have it be an active ingredient, and then they build the flavor profile as they wish. There are some more nuanced products coming out that use the full spectrum from the plant. So that's all the cannabinoids, terpenes, flavonoids, and make that a flavor component as well as an active component of a beverage. But those products are a little bit more niche, a little bit more for the experienced consumer that likes the relationship with the plant.
So there's marijuana, there's Delta 9 hemp THC, and there's Delta 8. What's the difference?
Good question. So hemp, marijuana, it's all under cannabis sativa L, it's a scientific term. The definition between the two was a line drawn by the federal government. That line is different ever so slightly depending where you are in the world. And so in some instances, it's kind of an arbitrary line, but over time, due to breeding and just kind of the polarization of CBD versus THC, CBD being the non-psychoactive version, is you got two pretty distinctly different cannabinoid profiles in those plants. And so Delta 9 is present in both, just in the hemp plant, it's far, far, far less, right? And so you can have a naturally derived THC beverage from hemp. You're just pulling it out of this plant that wasn't really designed to express large quantities of THC. Delta 8 is another form of THC that does, again, it shows up in very small amounts naturally in the plant. But the way that these compounds have hit the market broadly is that people are converting CBD into isomers like Delta 8 and Delta 9. And so that conversion process is a chemical process. It does happen naturally within the plant itself over time, but it's accelerated in this case in the lab. The challenge is that due to lack of regulations across the industry, there isn't a tight control over how those ingredients are manufactured. And that's where a lot of the discussion around the Farm Bill is happening today.
Delta 9, hemp THC, does it get you high?
Yes, absolutely. So THC from hemp, THC from cannabis or marijuana, whatever you want to call it, all the same. It's a chemical compound. And so it gets you high. 5 milligrams from one is the same as 5 milligrams from the other. But it is a great question because there's been a number of times where, those that are uninformed but still selling some products be like, oh no, that's not THC, that's hemp. And you can have THC from hemp, and that's the important thing to know.
And if I'm a legislator and this is happening, I'm saying, why should something that gets me high be sold in a liquor store like Total Wine versus solely in a dispensary?
Yeah, I think, it's, why should it be? I think depending on the form factor and the quantity of THC, and this is where it gets kind of complicated. So what we talk about in the industry a lot are low dose beverages, right? Low dose beverages meaning 5 milligrams, maybe 10 milligrams of THC. If you go to a dispensary, you might find a beverage that has 100 milligrams of THC, for instance. That we wouldn't advocate to be on store shelves, tomorrow in a liquor store, right? Just there's not enough knowledge about how to consume it responsibly. When you're talking about 5 or 10 milligrams, you're talking about something that's more dosable and that you can control the experience a bit better. And we have found that people use it similarly to how they do alcohol. It's not, I wouldn't call it an analog for the experience, but it's certainly a replacement. So if people are going out and they're looking for a non-alc alternative, it makes a perfect replacement for a lot of consumers.
You mentioned the 5 and the 10, the 2.5 milligram drinks are also very popular today. How do they compare? And I know this is difficult, if not impossible to do, but this is the questions that consumers are asking is, how do they compare to a beer, a cocktail, or a glass of wine?
It's a very complicated question.
It is.
Everyone's endocannabinoid system's a little bit differently. How the body reacts to cannabinoids that you consume is different than alcohol when it relates to food or mindset. So it is a completely different experience, but in quantity, people are generally comparing 2.5 to 5 milligrams to having one of those servings of beer or wine or a shot, right? It's there's some pretty standard equivalents on the alcohol side. While it's not directly comparable, it's that 2.5 to 5 milligrams.
The biggest difference being no hangover with the THC drinks. Is one safer than the other?
Historically, yes. Alcohol has hundreds of thousands of related deaths a year. I'm not up to speed on my statistics there, so fact check me. But on the cannabis side, there are no known overdoses due to cannabinoid consumption. And as far as what we've seen in legalized states, there hasn't been a demonstrable increase in DUI or other related infractions.
Look, I, as a parent, say this at some risk. I would rather my 18-year-old daughter drink THC drinks than the stuff that goes around at parties, notably large jugs of hard liquor. Do you feel the same way?
Yeah, and you know, I mean, I have kids myself. I'm very passionate about what I do, imagining a more peaceful and responsible future for my kids. But it's not just me. You know, some people say that I'm just talking my own book. You know, I've talked to, you mentioned concerts earlier. Like I've talked to event organizers and venue owners, and they're super excited about this prospect because they know alcohol incites violence or it creates aggression. And you know, we've gone as far as building judiciary systems at stadiums so that people can be tried right there on site and put into a cell. And like, that's absurd. We can have a replacement for alcohol that generally results in people being a lot calmer, a lot happier, and just enjoying the environment. And so that's obviously strictly anecdotal, but you know, anyone that's tried it probably understands what I'm talking about.
Oh, I have spoken to professional sports franchises who are close to getting in this game. I think airplanes would be a perfect place for them. I think cruise lines, I think hotels, and certainly sports stadiums to cut down on violence. Total Wine, you mentioned earlier. How did they change this game?
Wow, in a big way. Not only were they products on their shelves in places like Minnesota where they were starting to legalize, they put it on an end cap, which is the most prized real estate in a store. It's like you walk in and you see it right there, and it's like the impulse buy. You add it to your cart, and they saw a great uplift there. Based on that initial traction, they started taking it to every state that their legal team felt comfortable in going into. And I would say that they weren't very conservative about it. And so we've seen it pop up into a lot of states already. And they've been great supporters. You know, I know they've been talking to a number of folks in the industry. They're looking to help sell whatever the industry thinks it's going to sell. They aren't coming in with a pre-prescribed notion of where this is all going. They're kind of relying on the industry experts to tell them, you know, what's responsible, what are the consumers going to want, like how to really talk about these things. So I think they've been a great partner to the industry.
I've seen estimates all over the map, and I don't know if you have one in terms of the potential size of this market. How big can it get in your estimation?
Wow. You know, I remember the early days of cannabis where people would quote numbers like $100 billion by 2029. I think that was an early benchmark. I think that could very easily be represented by the cannabis beverage industry.
Wow, that is a massive number, 100 billion by 2029. That's, of course, if this Miller Amendment does not survive. What is it, and what would it do to the industry?
Yeah, the Miller Amendment is basically trying to put the toothpaste back in the tube when it comes to intoxicating hemp products, right? And so the Farm Bill of 2018, depending where you stand on cannabis and hemp regulations, created either loopholes or permissibility to the kind of derivatives of the hemp plant. And that has slowly kind of opened up the THC product marketplace, not just beverages, but everything. And so the Miller Amendment, it's a little bit of a recoil to that and trying to put things back into control. And essentially it would shut it all down. It is a pretty dramatic draft as it is right now. There's a lot of conversations going on because that Miller Amendment draft was the very start of the drafting of the Farm Bill. It was the House Ag Committee. We have a long ways to go. The Senate is going to be developing their version, and then there's a meeting of minds of trying to unify the language. And so where it all goes, it's kind of hard to tell. I know there's a lot of appetite to not recriminalize cannabinoids. You know, I was speaking to a lot of regulators recently at the CANRA conference. I think people just want to be assured that public safety and quality is at the top of everyone's minds. And the best way to get there is through responsible regulation. We just have a long ways to go. There's a lot of conversations that need to happen before the official farm bill goes through.
Would it help if D8 was banned? Delta 8. I have experimented with it, Ben, and I will tell you a small amount has sent me into a state that I'm unfamiliar with. I can't figure that out, but it tells me that there's not a great baseline for those products.
I wouldn't be surprised if we saw an overcorrection on the conversion process and to see all chemically synthesized, biosynthesized products get heavily restricted in the near future. And so that's the Delta 8s and any other compound that either doesn't naturally occur on the plant or doesn't occur in large quantities. And I know there's a lot of people that probably don't want to hear that because there are a lot of people consuming Delta 8. But what we've seen in other markets with like fully legal systems is not a high propensity to kind of gravitate towards these unknown compounds, right? They're kind of a workaround and that people are using today. And so what we could probably bet on seeing in the future is seeing that more tightly controlled.
Okay, I know you're about out of time. What would rescheduling mean for this beverage industry?
Rescheduling for the beverage industry,
because let me just be clear, it's unrelated in a way. It is marijuana, but if marijuana is rescheduled to Schedule 3, similar to Tylenol with codeine, would it take the focus entirely off of hemp-derived THC beverages?
I don't believe so. I think we face an issue with Schedule 3 in that it's not legalization. And so what you see in the state regulated markets for marijuana, those would still persist as federally illegal systems, right? The only thing that would really be legalized is the pathway for the medical applications of cannabis, which is great. I think if we can create medicine based on cannabis that is, can be applied for insurance and all that kind of stuff, I think it's a great move. It's also a great signal in the progression of the cannabis conversation. And so we might see more capital flow into the marketplace and a little bit more optimism as far as where things are going. But what it does for me as an operator is lights the fire to push harder on decriminalization, legalization, and creating a true legal future for the cannabis plant.
All right. Again, Ben's just about out of time. For those looking to get in this industry, and I'm told 2 to 4 companies every day are getting in, where there are already hundreds of players. What role does VERTOSA play in this process?
Yeah, we really try to demystify the market entry for a lot of these new companies. The supply chains, the marketplace, it's quite complicated from a regulatory structure, and we help people navigate that and go wherever they want to go. So, I like to say we are simply the active ingredient, but we are so much more, right? We're kind of the shepherd that helps you launch in all the markets that you want, whether it's Canada, regulated, or hemp, and make it easier for you to grow your brand.
One-stop shop to get on those shelves. Are you allowed to tell us a few favorites? We're surrounded by them. That's the only reason I ask.
I am surrounded by them. I love all my babies. That's all I can say. No, but some of the favorites recently have been winning a lot of awards. Flyers, Craig Louis, great CEO, and the products are a great analog for a cocktail. Like, it comes in a can. It's a beautiful product. Clarity out of Minnesota. They make beautiful 0-cal seltzers if you're more in kind of the healthy fad there. And then a California classic favorite, Wonder, just beautifully formulated juice base. It's one of my favorites right now.
That is a really good one as well. All right, last question is, what will be the game changer in this industry when they're for sale, when these drinks are for sale in this venue, at this, whether it's hotels or cruises or professional sporting event? We already have Total Wine. Maybe it's your grocery store. What will change the game?
I think restaurants absolutely change the game because that discovery mechanism to be able to experiment in a social setting and be like, oh, what's that? Let me try it. Bars too, but like, I think restaurants is the true normalizer. I know that's how I felt when I was with visiting Minnesota, but the more boring side is actually the economies of scale that interstate commerce bring. And so being able to have large manufacturers build these things at consistency at prices that the consumer can really digest is what helps the industry grow and become more sustainable. Right now, people are dealing with limited. I guess the economies of scale at these manufacturers and distributors today are quite limited because of the lack of distribution outlets. And so once we have that, I think you'll see a lot of companies really start to hit scalable growth.
Yeah, I think we're going to get a national restaurant chain to jump in here in the next 6 months. I have a couple in mind, and that will change everything. The OG of THC drinks. He is the CEO of VERTOSA. He is the host of High Spirits podcast. Ben Larson, so grateful for your time, sir, and what you're doing for this industry as well. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Dave. Really enjoyed it.
Let me make sure I stop the recording. Stop recording.